Hey, Miss Mandy, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you? Long time no see.
Long time. It seems like a long, long time, huh?
It was only a few weeks.
I know, but when you have so much happening in a
hmm
few weeks, it just seems like, on the one hand, we say time is flying so fast, because it is, because I can't believe it's this time of the month already,
Yeah.
right? And this time of the year already. And yet it seems like it's been a while since you and I sat down together.
Yeah. And I think a lot has happened in those 3 weeks or however long. It feels like a
Yeah,
lot is happening anyway.
feels like a lot. So, want to tell you one of the things I'm excited about today?
Yeah.
We get to have dinner together.
I
We get to have dinner together. Ah,
know.
I'm
In
so looking
person.
forward to that.
Me
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. Then there's a crazy side of me that wished I had insisted that I make dinner for you and your hubby.
Yeah.
Because
There'll
instead
be another time.
I'm bringing you a bag of goodies from the garden. So as I was putting it together this morning,
Oh.
I'm like, man, I could have been cooking this for them. I'm like, no, we'll go out and have dinner another time. I'll cook. But I got some stuff this morning, put a bag aside for you to say, yeah, I'll share some stuff
Oh.
from the
Yeah,
garden.
definitely. Well, and I'm on this new, it's not a diet. I'm just eating a lot better than
Ooh,
I have been. So I'm excited for stuff from the garden because I'm trying to eat whole foods, like nothing
good.
processed.
Good for you. What are some of your favorites right now?
So tomatoes, I love tomatoes. I love any sort
Ooh.
of greens, fish. My husband made chicken last night. We had chicken and broccoli. And I just want to put cheese on everything. So this is
Because
really hard for me.
it makes everything taste better.
I know. So I'm
Yeah,
really trying.
yeah. Well, we're going to be talking about that today in our conversation around flourishing. So it sounds like you're doing stuff to flourish because all that good food stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny we're going to talk about that because I have a feeling you're going to tell me the definition of what it is and what it isn't, and it's going to feel just like my eating choices right now. Like it's great, but it kind of sucks sometimes.
Well, remember that's what I was going through earlier this year. Remember I put on my COVID 2020 fluff, and I'm like, okay, Lisa, you're a tad too fluffy for fitting into your favorite clothing. So yeah, so the first few months of the year, my eating, my I would sit after dinner with my little sugar-free jello and convince myself that this is a delectable treat. It's like an amazing dessert. While Peter sits next to me with pie and ice cream and whatever,
Ugh,
eating stuff because he knows I'm not going to be. Yeah, I was kind of tempted, but I'm like, I'm sticking to my jello,
yeah.
right?
My
Because
delicious jello.
my delicious cherry flavored or strawberry flavored, my two favorite sugar-free jello to get that little sweet thing after. Now I'm popping those little cherry tomatoes.
Oh
Those are my
yeah.
favorite little, yeah. Yeah, I have a few of those in the bag for you as well.
Oh yeah. Those are my favorites.
Yeah. So this is all about flourishing. Challenges show up and we've got to figure out how to push past them and push through them, sometimes even leverage them. I was thinking as I was getting to our conversation, our podcast is about living beyond your limits. And that's really what flourishing is all about. Flourishing is not about how great we do in times and wonderful times. Anybody can do that, right? We're talking about how to live your best life. Some people say the good life, but I like to say, what is my best life or your best life? How to live that despite or sometimes because of everything that we're going through.
And when you first said you wanted to talk about this, I mean, I kind of fought you back in email and I said, what? I don't get it. Because
Yeah.
the perfectionist in me is saying, oh, she's going to tell me how to be flourishing only means how to be perfect.
Ooh.
And I was like, that's not achievable. That's just not going to happen. There's no way to be 100% flourishing, because that would be being perfect. And that would be being happy all the time and hitting your deadlines, and your career is perfect and your family's perfect. So that's a bit why I pushed back, and I said, I don't understand.
Yeah. Can I tell you a little something? I really don't like the word perfect. I kind of detest it a little.
Yeah.
I think it sets us up.
Yeah.
I think it sets us up because so I'm one of those who, probably to a fault, I'm always stretching myself and seeing how much further. And if there is this perfect thing, where are you going with this? Where are you going with growth with your life? And so there are times when I'm, talking with leaders or interviewing their stakeholders, and we're looking for opportunities for development for this leader. And, folks will talk about her or talk about him as if they have reached the limit. And I have to invite them to say, no, my leader is really good at what she does or he does, but we're looking to refine certain edges. We're looking to push certain limits to be even better, to serve your people even better. So we're putting things on a scale, let's say a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not at all, whatever this thing is, and 5 is exceptional and way up there. And even the most exceptional leaders I know, they're still striving for that thing, even if it means you're going off that scale. So it's not perfection. It's always you going to your next best level, right? And
Yeah.
striving for more. So yeah, I felt the tension, and that was good.
Yeah. You said, oh yeah,
Yeah.
you can challenge me on it.
Yeah. So I was thinking about flourishing, and me and my gardening. And it just came to my mind like, that's a perfect metaphor for what flourishing is all about. Perfect metaphor. I started out with, this year was the first time I'm like, I'm going to be, a better farmer girl this time. Because remember, I'm always trying to do something, push myself. And so I bought my seeds, and I went out and got all the stuff, the containers, the peat moss, the whatever. And I had these 2 big trays on my kitchen table by the window for a couple of months, with the seeds sown and little seedlings coming up, to make and giving them all the light and the water, the right amount, the starter, whatever, right? To make sure that they're ready for planting. But before they could be ready for planting, they took their time and they grew inside. Peter went and got me really good soil. Like, he went way downtown and got really good composted stuff, so it's healthy. And then another friend gave me fertilizer from that mushroom brewing. So I saw that mushroom, so rich fertilizer. So I had my beds ready to go for my seeds to be planted. When it was time and it was no longer cold, the soil was the right temperature for my plants, I went out and I plowed and I carefully planted them. I took the time and I spaced them carefully, depending on, was this my callaloo, which is a kind of spinach that Jamaicans and Africans and whatever love. So I spaced my callaloo really well, spaced my squash and my cucumber and my corn and my green beans and tomatoes and my, you name it, all that stuff, because everybody needs their breathing space, and everybody needs sunlight and air. So all these things. And then, what made things even better? It rained and rained, and I know you wanted to be outside. I know you wanted to be outside. So there are days when it rained, and I'm like, oh my God, I know Mandy would prefer to be out with the kids, so whatever. I hope half a day is sunshine. And at the same time, I'm like, oh my gosh, my plants are loving this, right? So within a short space of time, that was the epitome of flourishing. So they still had a way to go, but they were getting all these essential components to ensure that they could flourish. Now, I knew that I had to get ready for, pests coming in and fungi affecting my stuff, which they did. They came in. A couple of my tomato plants now have wilts on them. Does that mean that my garden isn't going to flourish or continue to? No, it means I now need to, as the farmer girl, I need to go figure out, which I have been, what my tomatoes need, what my zucchini need, to ensure that this fungal infection doesn't spread across the whole place. I've got to make sure I'm weeding, right? So flourishing isn't something that just happens by. the stuff I have in my package for you this evening, that couldn't just happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, you don't just wake up and say, today is a flourish day.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think, like everything you just described, I think I'm really great at giving people that advice and telling people what they should do and what they need to do. And when they come to me, you know, my employees who might need something, or my family or my friends, I'm so good at, I feel like I try to listen and say, oh, go do this and set some boundaries. But I am horrible to
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. A lot of
And
folks are.
that's where it's, and I don't know why it's so difficult. And that's something I've been telling one of my coworkers. So we have this huge event coming up, the conference you spoke at last year, huge event, and it gets crazy right now. And I can constantly tell her, and I know she's listening, to treat herself the way she treats me, because she talks to me in the most amazing, uplifting way and gives me great advice. And I say, talk to yourself the way you're talking to me right now. And that is, I mean, that is hard.
Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting that you are supporting her in her quest or aspirations to flourish, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is that we all need some kind of support. Whether for me, it's I always need to the coach with her coach. So
Yeah.
I always need some kind of support that includes coaching support, which is to help make sure that I'm watching out for my blind spots. It's to make sure that I'm taking the lessons that I'm sharing with others and I'm internalizing and embodying them, right? The worst thing is for my wheels to be falling off my wagon while I'm trying to carry other people. So having that support to help me is something that's critical. You know, so we talked about the whole gardening and flourishing, but what does flourishing really mean
Yeah.
for human being? What does it
What
mean?
does it
So
look like?
when you think of flourishing, what comes to mind? What does it mean for you?
Flourishing to me is, I would say, sleeping is huge. So,
Mm-hmm,
and sleeping entails everything, right? Because it
mm-hmm,
means I'm able to fall asleep without the thoughts in my brain.
mm-hmm,
So I'm getting the sleep that I need, and I'm okay with laying down,
mm-hmm,
shutting down, turning off, and giving myself rest.
mm-hmm.
And then waking up in the morning with that sleep that I had and starting the day in a really good place.
Yeah.
So that my everything, I feel like the sleep and the eating is so important for how I start my day and how I interact with others around me, especially
Mm-hmm.
when I know it's gonna be crazy.
Crazy. So it sounds like flourishing for you is a lot about well being.
Yes.
So I'm pausing because there's something interesting happening behind me. Are you hearing a sound? You did not hear that sound.
No.
That's okay. I bet some of our listeners have this as well. So when you're married to a geeky person, there are things that move around in your house sometimes that you don't know about. And so Peter left, but I'm sure he's had the robot on because he's always vacuuming or sweeping or something. So I just heard the, but you couldn't hear that, right? You
No,
couldn't
I
hear
get
that.
it.
I wonder which of our listeners have these robots that vacuum for them and that
Uh-huh.
sweep. Anyway, so that's one aspect of flourishing. You're talking about your definition for you, what flourishing means is your well-being. When you are sleeping well, eating well, feeling good, so you can navigate whatever tough stuff's coming around you. And for some folks, flourishing means that they are growing personally and professionally, they're growing at work, they're being acknowledged. For others, flourishing is around their financial well-being. For others, flourishing means they have a good network of people around them. And that means that they are flourishing? Well, the truth is, from a psychological perspective, the researchers who study flourishing, they say flourishing is all of that and more. So they see flourishing as this complex construct, that it is about your well-being and it is about your happiness, but there's a little bit more to it. So if you were to think, based on your definition of flourishing, which is about well-being, what else could you add to that to expand that definition for you of what it means to flourish? Because I think you're a much more multidimensional person than that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt flourishing for me is continuing to move up in my organization and
Yeah.
continuing to take on more responsibility. I mean, it's not, there's no one at my company who doesn't know that I want a seat at the table. Everybody knows that.
You go, girl.
Yeah, I
Yes. And
mean,
I love that you say it loud and proud.
yeah, I mean, that's a big thing is achieving that in the near future and the future. That's a huge thing for me, is achieving that seat at the table. And
Yeah.
but you know, the thing, I know myself well enough, and it's probably just like you, like that's never enough. I know I'm going to always want more, but I also am cognizant now that always wanting more doesn't have to be at my day job.
Right.
Wanting
Right.
more out of my life does not, part of that, that's the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, is that was something more. I wanted to have more of that.
And more, it sounds like, and you and I have talked about this before as well, it's not necessarily more stuff that we're having, it's more of an impact. It's how much more can we connect with others? How much more can we inspire and motivate others to action? So that's part of the more, doing more in service of others. So that's part of flourishing. And you know, one of the people whose work I admire and I draw on a lot is Dr. Martin Seligman. He is kind of like the premier researcher and author in the area of flourishing. And I took some notes on this. And he has this model they call the 5-factor model. And here are some additional stuff, that some things that he puts in this model when we think about flourishing. And we can personalize this. And we can also use this to look at how well our family is doing, how well our team is doing, how well our organization is doing. So he looks at the factors include positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. And interestingly enough, you and I are talking about all those already. So the positive emotions are, you know, how we think about ourselves, think about the world around us. If we think that, you know, people in general are good, even when we're dealing with folks who are behaving crappy, that people in general are good, we have positive feelings about ourselves and about others. Those go a long way in shaping how we show up, how we think, and how we behave. So having positive emotions. Then the second one, engagement. How plugged in are we at work? Are we finding that we're getting fulfillment out of the work that we're doing? You know, and how is that feeding our soul? We hear a lot about engagement. How can we get our people more engaged? Well, even as at an individual level, we have to ask, how can I be more engaged in my work? And there are days when my engagement is all the way up here, and there are other days when it's like I'm climbing up a slippery wall and somebody keeps pouring the oil and I'm trying to go up, and it's hard to do that. So the engagement is off. And he's saying this is an essential element. Then relationships is a third one, right? Do we have a healthy network of folks around us at work, in our family, in our community? And then do we find meaning in the stuff that we're doing? What does this mean to you? For example, you and I chatting and sharing with our listeners, what's the meaning of this for us? Because sometimes we're not getting the kind of meaning we need from the work that we do for money, and we've got to find it elsewhere, or we've got to shift things at work so we are finding that meaning do the work that we're doing. So he thinks that's critical. And then the last one is accomplishments. One of your goals is to grow in the organization, to get us a higher and higher level seat at the table. And so he sees these 5 things: positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment, as crucial to flourishing.
That's interesting. I mean, it's, I have found things that really resonate always after you hear them sound so simple, right?
I know. That's the beauty of it.
It's like, wow, that sounds so simple. I do want to tell you a quick story about
Yeah.
meaning. And, you know, part of doing this podcast was a little bit selfish, right? Like, I wanted a place to talk to you and to talk about things and to get out things that were going on in both of our lives and to get it out on the table. But the other part that both you and I said when we laid out our goals was we wanted to have an impact on others. And
Yes.
I didn't realize that this would cross over with my day job as much as it has. And one of my coworkers recently is listening to the podcast, and the best thing he said was, I listened to the first episode, and that's when we were talking about our new normal and where we're at and what the past year looked like and kind of the crazy spiral that was. And he said, I thought I was alone. And I thought I was the only one who was feeling like that. And I'm so glad to know, even though you're struggling or talking about things that just royally sucked, that
Yeah.
I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And we're all dealing with it. And so
Wow.
for me, that's exactly what the goal was
Yeah.
to get it out there so
Yeah.
that it's not so big and heavy and scary
Yeah.
and lonely in your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on. You got it. You got it. So even talking about a topic like this, flourishing, it's a way to help folks understand really what it is and how we can get to that place, our place of flourishing, because my place of flourishing is not your place of flourishing. You are not going to toss your body on a rope across a pond or scale a 12-foot wall or crawl in mud with barbed wire under your back, right? You're
No.
not looking for that kind of fulfillment. For me, that floats my boat. That's like,
Yeah.
man, that's, I know it's crazy, but it does something. So it's living our fulfilled life, not so. And I love the way Martin Seligman thinks about it. He says to flourish is to find fulfillment in our lives, accomplishing meaningful and worthwhile tasks, and connecting at a deeper level. And he calls it living the good life. And I call it living your best life. And here's a little thing that I love about this. We can do this in the midst of the greatest disruptions, challenges, or whatever we're going through. One of my greatest periods of flourishing in my life was while my son Matthew was sick with cancer, which was horrible because the kind of cancer Matthew had, his doctors did not expect he would survive. And yet, because of the kind of support and love that we as a family got from our community or neighbors or families or friends, my gym, because I was pushing during that time, man, I was crazy running them Spartan races. I was all over the place. There were days when I was working out twice a day. Crazy. I admit it's a bit crazy. But guess what? It was feeding a lot of these things that we talk about that are essential for making us feel good, feel accomplished, pushing us to another level. And what the researchers say is it's not some trait we're born with. I wasn't born with this trait. Remember, I didn't even like to sweat before I started all this workout stuff. Any workout that included me sweating too much was nil, not for me. That was my idea about workout before, right? And then I got into this whole thing and I learned from others and I was supported by others who pushed me beyond my limits to do things I didn't think I could do. and found myself in this crazy period while Matthew was so sick. Knock on wood, he's flourishing and doing well right now. And during that time, I was able as an individual to feel as if I was living a good life while taking care of my son. It blows my mind.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to ask you, that's funny because that was one of my questions I was going to ask you. You know, I read a lot of World War II novels, and
Mhm.
it's just a part of history. It's a lot of fiction, but you know, the word flourish has such an amazing connotation. You know, you hear it and you just
Mhm.
think, oh, you're running through a valley and you got your hands in the air and music is playing, and that's what I think of, right? And then what you just said in the book I'm reading right now, which is incredible, based on a family who had to immigrate from the Ukraine to Germany during World War II, is this main character, and it's based on a true story, is flourishing by the correct definition in horrible circumstances.
Absolutely.
Horrible. And so when I first heard you say to talk about this, I immediately was like, well, how can you say that to someone who's going through, who, whose spouse or family member just passed
Yeah.
from COVID, or who are protesting every day about
Yeah.
social justice, and someone whose family member was murdered, or
Yeah.
you know, World War II. I mean, it's like, how can you say, oh, you just need to work on flourishing? But
Mhm.
I'm hearing what you're saying, which is, and I'm seeing it in this book I'm reading and in stories I'm hearing, is it's using those same tools. And again, I have to remind myself that flourishing is not perfection.
No,
Isn't
it's
it?
not.
It's not. And I need to actually probably stop using that word as well, especially with anytime thinking about children, you know, because I have a tendency to do that with my children is, oh, they didn't
Mhm.
have a good day today. Oh, what are we going to
Mm.
do?
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
Yeah.
everybody has good days and bad days.
A bad days, exactly. I love that you say that because here's another thing to keep in mind. Flourishing is not a static state. So it doesn't mean that once you start to flourish, you are flourishing all the time. No, 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 no. You have peaks and valleys, right? Yet, aspiring to flourish, which means you're going to push through with the support and all the resources that you need. Think about my garden. So I still expect my garden to flourish, despite the fact that fungal infection has taken on to some of my squashes, right? I saw my teardrop tomato plant, the leaves turning yellow. So what that says to me, Lisa, a disease is impacting two of your stuff and you've got to take care of it. Now, what do? I go do the research. What's the stuff for that? A friend saw them on Saturday, my squash leaves, and said, now, one of the things you need to do is to get a pair of shears and go in and carefully cut each leaf out and don't let that leaf touch anything else. And you got to clean the shear off before you go and cut from another plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So us as human beings for flourishing, we've got to look at what's working and what's not working, where we need to shift gears, where we might need to expand our social support or contract our social. We might be scattered too thinly, too many friends that we've got to juggle the relationships, or some relationships that are not working out anymore. They're toxic, they're holding us back, they're hurting us, and we might need to kind of prune things apart, right? So flourishing isn't static and it isn't going to happen by itself. It takes some effort, right? Now, I know that when I heard you mention earlier also about, we're going to talk about flourishing as if, folks are going through all this stuff, how can they flourish? And a thought that came to mind for me also is that folks also mistakenly believe that, for example, someone with a mental health issue can't flourish or mental health diagnosis, right? Because remember last time we talked about the spectrum of from well-being, flourishing, languishing in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
having not so good well-being at one end and flourishing at the other. Well, we're talking about a spectrum of well-being, which is different from mental health diagnosis or mental health illness. There's so many people I know in my life who are diagnosed with a mental health issue, who are managing it well through psychotherapy and medication and exercise and diet and whatever, and they are flourishing. There are others with the same diagnosis who are not. And then there are others without any kind of diagnosis, and they're not flourishing. Why? Because they're yet to get to a place where they're balancing all those components we talked about earlier, the positive mindset or emotions, the managing the relationship, feeling engaged, feeling accomplished, all of that stuff. So it's not about our mental diagnosis, but it is a bit about our mental wellness and what we're doing to take care of that. Does that make sense for you?
That does, yeah. And and I shared this last time, I've had anxiety and panic attacks since I was 18.
Mm-hmm.
So when you initially asked me, what does flourishing mean?
Mm-hmm.
My initial thinking was, oh, it's a day when my anxiety isn't bad. When my anxiety isn't bad. It's a day when I'm panic attack free, I have no anxiety.
Yeah.
But really, that's not it at all.
No, it's not. It's not. Because flourishing could be that day when you had a massive war, you felt a massive panic attack coming on, and you draw on what your therapist has given you, the skills that you have, and you managed it well. Or you may have gone through it and it was rough, but you recovered from it to move on to some task you had to do. Or you dealt with it and you're still there for your children. Or you dealt with it and then all you wanted for the rest of the day was to take care of yourself and to make yourself okay for the rest of the day. That's flourishing.
Yeah, and I think ending up, we keep coming back to the name of the podcast, ending up on that other side and pushing beyond and getting through it.
Yes.
Crossing over. And I try and tell myself, and I've tried this for years, to look at my anxiety as a sort of gift, to kind of flip the script. Yes. And it allows me to be more empathetic. It allows me to see a lot of things that other people don't see, because I might worry about a lot of things going around me at once. Mm-hmm. And that really helps a lot, because it pushes me to embrace the things that I typically beat myself up about. Mm. And so for me, living beyond my limit is really acknowledging that as part of who I am, and not constantly trying to fight it or beat it down or conquer it, because I don't think it's something that will leave me. Just I won't magically wake up one day, but it's how I deal with it.
Yeah, and I would even reframe it a little, Mandy. I know right now your thinking is, this is who I am. And another way to think about it is, anxiety is this issue that I have to manage. So it's not you, it doesn't define you. And there may come a time in your life, a year from now, 6 months, 5, 10 years from now, when you have developed the practice and a habit and skill set where you are managing your anxiety in such a way that you guys coexist, that you really acknowledge it as a gift and not this thing that bothers you.
Yeah.
Not this thing that bothers you. So rather than it's who I am, it's this issue that I deal with. And I'm figuring out how each and every day, how to sometimes push through, how to manage, how to challenge. And there are days when you're going to find yourself even leveraging your anxiety. Because if it's a gift, we want to get something out of it.
Yeah. I'm curious I want to hear what's one of your ways that you consider when you're flourishing?
When I'm, what is it that I'm doing, or?
Yeah.
What am I doing when I'm flourishing? What am I doing when I'm flourishing? Gosh, you know what? This weekend, I felt on top of the world. I 3 times for the weekend, following COVID protocols because we're outside, I got to cook and feed folks. Oh my gosh, Mandy. And
Oh,
because it's a time of the year when I'm getting so much from my garden and I can go out and pick all the herbs and the veggies that I need. And I was in seventh heaven. Now, I was exhausted after it. And I knew I was going to be exhausted. I knew my feet was
yeah,
going to hurt. You know, I had one of my best friends here. So I had a house guest for over a week while still we hosted a graduation party in the backyard. We had a potluck. We had an impromptu breakfast for out of town guests. And I knew I was going to be exhausted,
yeah,
right? Juggling all of that. But that just felt so good to me. So that's on the almost the beautiful end of it. But I shared with you earlier about going through what we're going through with Matthew. And
mhm,
I remember one day, and Matthew was still very sick, um, when it dawned on me that we can hold pain and sorrow, the deepest pain and sorrow, at the same time as we hold the highest level of joy. Because here I had just finished running a Spartan race, and I was so excited and relieved and happy. I was crying and laughing at the same time. And I ran that race and I pushed myself because I told myself I was doing this for Matthew. I told myself, if Matthew can fight so hard every day, and he was very, very sick at that time, I'm like, you can do this. That wall can't be bigger. You can do this, you can do this, you can do this. And it was hard. I mean, it took a lot out of me to do it. And I messed up and I asked for help and I had people pushing my butt over walls and pulling me up out of stuff and whatever, right? But part of that is we don't flourish on our own. We
yeah,
flourish as part of a community. We flourish as part of a community. And if we're going to flourish through mental health issues, through job challenges, through marital issues, through health issues, you name it, if we're going to do it, we need a community to do that
yeah,
with, right?
yeah,
There's a quote I'm going to read from Dr. Martin Seligman, the same fellow I was quoting some of his stuff, his work, who I admire so much. And he says, I think you can be depressed and flourish. I think you can have cancer and flourish. I think you can be divorced and flourish. When we believed that happiness was only smiling and good mood, that wasn't very good for people like me, people in the lower half of positive affectivity, meaning positive feelings.
mhm,
That is pretty powerful. That is,
yeah,
for me, that is hope.
yeah. I was about to say that that gives so much hope. And that's one of the things when we initially met that I loved so much is, and that's why I love therapy so much. I love my therapist, is, and when I wrote an article about one of your sessions, I remember I wrote an article for our magazine and I said, I love talking about this. And we were talking about stuff in the workplace because it gives me hope that I can change, that my brain isn't permanent, that my defaults aren't permanent, that every day is an opportunity to tweak something or change something and change the way the neurons fire and change the way you look at a situation. And it's not black or white, it's
It
not
isn't.
depressed or happy. It's not
Yeah,
anxious or calm.
yeah.
And it's both.
It's
All
it's
day.
all of them. It's all of them. So now that we have, talked about what it is and we have a different take on it, I always want to leave our folks with some little tips, right? Because all of us want to push forward flourishing. We want some ideas. So, I jotted down some stuff that I want to share.
Okay,
Look at where
I
I
want to
where
hear
I
it.
am with this. Yeah. Um, so if we were to look at, Martin's 5-factor model: emotions, engagement, relationship, meaning, and accomplishment. then that gives us an idea of some of the things that we need to work on, right? So if we think about positive emotion, then we've got to put some stuff in place to make sure that we are feeding our soul so we can laugh and be happy. I have a dear friend, Milka. And one of the things beautiful name, she's originally from Kenya, and I call her my little sister. And Milka makes me laugh, but not just your regular laugh. Milka has this laugh that once she starts, says, ha, 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 and I find myself laughing, ha, ha. And we will talk about the toughest, and we talk about everything with each other. We laugh, we cry, you name it. And sometimes in the depths of our tough stuff that we're talking through, we just burst out with some little joke and we just laugh. And I always get off a call with her feeling better than I did before, regardless of what we're talking about. So finding ways to feed our souls to make ourselves, experience those positive emotions. So that's one of it. The second one is, commit to living a good life. And that doesn't mean some fancy life. It means your best life, like you're doing right now. You're eating a little better. You're watching your sleep. You're working on stuff, right? So whatever it takes for you, however you define good life, what is that? Figure that out and do something every day. That might mean setting goals that, every day I must eat some veggies or I must drink a glass of water. Simple things, not rocket science, some simple stuff. And then another one would be think about, what's the meaning in life for you? What purpose is behind what it is that you're doing? You and I decide to do this because we want to bring more meaning to our lives. And the purpose of this is to impact others for good, to have conversations that bring others in to talk about what does it really mean to push beyond your limit? What does that really mean? Right? So those are just a few things. There's so many more. And I'd love to hear, what some of our listeners are thinking about in terms of some of the things that we can do. What are some things that cross your mind that we can do to flourish even more?
So before we wrap up, I'll give one that we have a community of women that we talk with at my organization. And one of the questions, we have a question of the week. And one of the questions recently was, if you had nothing holding you back financially, time-wise, resource-wise, what would you do professionally and why?
Mm-hmm.
And there were all these amazing answers. And the one I loved the most was travel while writing a book.
Ah,
Sounds heavenly, right?
yes.
But I would say, because of how the optimist I am, is to work towards those things that
Mm-hmm.
you, like what you've always said, feeds your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And for you and I both, I think relationships are a huge part of that. When you just mentioned having people over and feeding them, I think sharing something meaningful to you, which is your garden and your food, with people you love and care about is kind of
Mm-hmm.
like two birds with one stone, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I would challenge people to think about, what is it that you've always wanted to do or would hope to do, and what could you maybe do to get
Yeah.
there? A small piece of it,
Yeah.
a small step towards that, of the thing that really does feed your soul.
Mm-hmm. 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 And it doesn't, sometimes when folks hear this stuff, Mandy, they think it's some big stuff, and it's not.
Mm-mm.
You may just need to be intentional about planning some time to walk in the woods or play Scrabble with your children.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Or, go run in the rain. My husband and I were on a walk one morning and it looked like it was going to rain. So we're hustling it because we're getting a good morning walk in before coming back to work. And like the Peter he is, he says, I can't remember the last time we kissed in the rain. And I'm like, oh, wow. I don't remember that either. So even though
we're
we're
about
trying
to get PG-13 today.
I know, right? And he's like, he's now, even though we are hightailing it along and trying to walk fast, he is hoping and praying that it would rain so that we could do that. Because for him, that would be the best day ever. Right now, for him, that would,
Oh,
I know.
I love it.
We didn't get to kiss in the rain. We did kiss, but there wasn't raining because the rain didn't come down. So, it's little things. It's not
Yeah.
some big, things that we have to, those little things that's going to feed your soul. So is
Yeah.
that our challenge for our listeners today?
That's it.
That's
That's
it.
it.
All right. Always
This
such
was
a
a good one.
delight, Mandy.
I know. Thank you. And thank you all for listening today. You can subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Google Play. And I can't wait to see you tonight in person, in the
Me
flesh.
too. Me too.
All right.
Yes. Looking
Thank
forward
you,
to it.
everyone.
Bye, everybody. See you next time.